And again, I think I would like to ask a question that you, Howard, were asking, and ask it a little bit more specifically. Does Brother Eli believe that the entire earth was flooded 4,350 years ago by a Noah's flood, or deluge, if you prefer the word?
Brother Eli? Do you believe that the earth was flooded 4,200 years ago, approximately?
I believe that there was a flood. I believe that there was a flood because it is in the Bible. I believe that there was a flood. But there are things we have to...
Okay. We're coming close to the end of this particular period. Just hold your horses, both of you. Dr. Grady, just before the break, we were discussing a particular section of the Bible which refers to the Noahic flood. You had a question that you wanted just to clarify.
I simply was trying to ask Brother Eli whether or not he accepted Noah's flood as global or local.
Okay, let's start with that. Brother Eli, welcome back to the program. Thank you for staying with us. Do you accept that the Bible's account of the flood was a global flood, or do you think it was just a local flood?
I believe that there was a flood. But never in the Bible can you find the word, it was a global flood. But never in the Bible can you find, but never in the Bible can you find, but never in the Bible can you find, but never in the Bible can you find the word, it was a global flood.
So do you just think it was a local flood in the area of Mesopotamia, or?
I beg your pardon, Brother Howard?
Was it just a local flood, perhaps in the region of Mesopotamia or a particular region in the Middle East?
When I say nowhere in the Bible can you find that it is a global flood, I do not want to imply that it is a local flood. It was a flood that eliminated all human life on earth save 8, according to the Bible.
Okay, let me just hold you there, Brother Eli. Dr. Grady, you heard that Brother Eli's reply there. So not a definite yes or no, but certainly not, well, I'd say not a yes as far as global. So what would you say the evidence is for a global flood? And the significance of it.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, a global flood is necessary to eliminate all life on the earth that breathes air, walks on the land, animals, plants, and humans, except those on the ark. That's a very clear Bible teaching. And when Brother Eli says nowhere does the Bible say it was global, I would disagree. If we take a look at 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 7, and read it in the Greek language, Peter says that the entire earth was cataclysmically covered with water. So the Bible is very clear that the flood of Noah was that. And if it was a local flood, then not all plants and animals that live on the dry land would have perished. It would be only those in the local area. Now, of course, if people only lived in a local area, then yes, you could kill humans and have only 8 left. But why build the ark in the first place? He was given a 120-year warning of the flood. He had 100 years to build the ark. He could easily have walked away. God would not have had to send the animals to him to be preserved after their own kind. There are many discrepancies in what Brother Eli is teaching and what biblical teaching is. Again, I would also point out, and I think you told me he was in Malaysia, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong about that. However, if one were to take a look at the mouth of the Indus River, the Ganges River, the Yangtze River, or any other river in the area of Southeast Asia, he would find that there is only 4,000, roughly 350 to 4,500 years worth of mud, clearly showing that, in fact, the continents have only been eroding for about that amount of time. The same thing is true of the Congo, the Amazon, the Mississippi, the Volga, Seine, Rhine, Colombia. All the great rivers of the world only show that the Earth has been eroding for 4,350 to 4,500 years. Clearly, the physical evidence is there to support a global flood. It was not a local flood.
Okay. Dr. Grady, just hold that there. Brother Eli, just reading the account there in in Peter, it does actually say that the world at that time was deluged in water. So, we're talking about a worldwide flood as rather than a local flood. Now, you might think this is picking its little bits out for no reason, but it does undermine some of the other things and the significance of the fountains of the deep, the great upheaval, the movement of the tectonic plates, the Pangea happening, which does help to understand why you could find diamonds at a time in an instant almost that has come up from the depths of the earth. What is your understanding then if you read Peter's account of the world being deluged with water, the whole world as it is, not just a local flood?
First of all, Brother Howard, let us take into consideration that as far back as the time of Noah, the earth was not yet populated as a whole. There is no account in the Bible that tells us that in the time of Noah, that these continents of the world existed are already populated with people. So there is a necessity for a global flood because there is a global population already. We just go back to some years in history, and there are places of the earth that are not yet populated. To conclude hastily that the flood that was needed to be sent during Noah's time is a global flood will mean that as early as the time of Noah, the earth is already populated. In every place of the earth, the population is, there is already a population, if we can say, explosion all over the earth. And what Dr. Grady said, that because 120 years have passed in the making of the ark, that animals can just walk, and Noah can just walk away from the place of the flood, it will mean something like it's nonsense, because we know that the earth now is divided into continents, islands, etc.
But there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that.
Can people from Mesopotamia walk to Asia to be preserved? Is that what Dr. Grady means?
Okay, let's ask Dr. Grady
The
to come in there.
The reason why God ordered Noah to build an ark is that it's not to travel, but just to float on that very place where they live, to make them float and to save them from the flood. But it doesn't mean that it follows necessarily that there is a global flood necessary to cover the entire earth. The Bible does not speak of a global flood categorically. When the Bible says,
let me just read you chapter 3 of 2 Peter, verse 6 says that the earth was formed out of water by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water. The earth was destroyed at that time, but we're talking about some of the smaller semantic type things here. Dr. Grady, perhaps if you deal directly with Brother Eli here on some of these issues the two of you might be able to sort this out.
Well, first of all, Howard, not only do we have 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 7, where Peter talks about the entire earth being flooded, you have in the book of Genesis that the highest piece of land from creation 6,000 years ago to the flood about 4,500 years ago was covered by at least 22.5 feet of water. In Psalm 104, verses 5 through 9, you have a chronology of the flood. In verse 6, it clearly states the water was standing above the mountains. Now, even if you take Brother Eli's position of a local flood, if the water is standing above the mountains, the water would flow over on into other valleys and eventually much further. So that his position of a local flood is unacceptable, and it is, unfortunately, in error. I would also point out to you that Brother Eli, again, doesn't read his Bible correctly, because in Genesis chapter 1, verse 9, it clearly says that when God created the earth, he then goes on, after making the earth like a round ball of clay with water covering the surface, he then makes light. He then separates the waters above from the waters below. In verse 9, and I will read from New American Standard, then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. Pangea, a word used typically by evolutionists, but actually belongs to us creationists, is true. That when God separated the waters were gathered into one place, the land was gathered into one place, the continents all interconnected from the time of creation, 6,000 years ago, until the time of the flood. At the time of the flood, the fountains of great deep burst through, cut Pangea up into pieces, we call them continents, where they could then move rapidly because they were floating on a layer of water, the waters below, again described in Genesis chapter 1. Now, people very clearly walked from the Tower of Babel to Asia, and they did it very, very quickly after the flood. The fact is that they could also have occupied the entire Earth's land surface, with perhaps the exception of a few islands, from creation to the flood, because all the continents were connected before the flood. And as I have taught before, after the Tower of Babel experience, after the flood, after the continents are separated, there is an ice age which occurs. Land bridges, which are really the continental shelves, were exposed from Southeast Asia to Australia, from Siberia to Alaska. This allowed people to migrate then to all the continents other than Antarctica after the flood. So there's a very clear teaching that, yes, there were millions and millions of people. We don't know how many, the Bible doesn't state. But using just normal demographics, knowing that Adam and Eve had not only 3 sons, but many other sons and daughters, that women were having children in the areas of 450 years. We know from the various genealogies from the flood to the time of Noah that using just very conservative demographics, there would have been millions of people, and they would have been spread around because that certainly was God's plan. It does not mean they were all concentrated in one place. Indeed, after the flood, God says, my idea is that you should spread back out across the entire world and repopulate the earth. And they do rebel, staying in one place at Babel, and God judges them, gives them the languages, forcing them to go back out across the entire earth.